Academica Media. You are listening to Charter School Superstars, bringing you the voices of an education revolution.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Our guest this week on the program is the National Director of Content and Implementation for Curriculum Associates, makers of the iReady instructional and assessment platform. Our guest is a frequent speaker on the topic of humanizing student data and providing instructors with a more effective framework for student interventions. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting www.curriculumassociates.com and at Curriculum Associates on Twitter. We are happy to welcome Brooklin Trover onto Charter School Superstars. Hi, Brooklin.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me.
Thrilled to have you. This is such a cool topic, and it's one that, my fault, we have not discussed nearly enough on this program. RTI, student intervention, so important, definitely of import to our charter school viewers and listeners. So I'm excited to dig right into it. So for the uninitiated, and I'd probably count myself among them, can we start by having you give the viewers and listeners a quick crash course on RTI MTSS? I have a vague recollection of this. It was like a 3-tier model, right, where you give broad instruction to the class, and then you identify a subset of that group that needs more intervention. You give them small group instruction, and then a subset in that subset may need even more instruction. So you're giving single kind of focused instruction to those students. Am I in the ballpark? It's been a long time for me.
You're so in the ballpark. It's like you can see the triangle in front of you, right?
I do. I actually do see the different color triangle. I remember that from my ed school days.
Exactly. We've been indoctrinated with it. So overall, of course, it's education. So we have letters, acronyms to describe things. So we have that going for us. MTSS is the bigger umbrella, multi-tiered systems of support. And underneath that, there's lots of different pieces. SEL, of course, more letters. Here we go. SEL, PBIS, other pieces of emotional or behavioral supports. But then also under that umbrella is RTI. And that's kind of my niche. So RTI, response to intervention, is that triangle we know. And you were so right. That broad instruction, we call it first instruction, right? Tier 1 instruction goes to everybody. And then we kind of level down. What's happened, though, and I will say this as already pulling up the issue, is we've put students into these tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or colors or bands, whatever people are calling them, as kind of an overall placement. And you got to think to yourself, like, I have talents in language arts that I don't have in math, but do I get like blocked into the same color? Am I stuck in some sort of tier? And so over the past 25 years or so, I feel like we've gone to a locked in sort of system and have really taken the responsiveness out of RTI. And so it's my goal, my mission, to bring it back.
So if that model is a little too rigid, if it's a little too inflexible, maybe it doesn't have the humanity that it needs, what should we be doing instead?
It's not an instead situation. It's more of a granular approach. So let's keep that same triangle, right? Envision that. But instead of thinking of it as, here's my triangle that I'm using for ELA, and here's my green kids, here's my yellow kids, and here's my red kids, right?
Those are the colors I see when I see the triangle.
Yep. Just let those colors sort of blend together, almost like a ripple effect, like little waves, right? Because some students are going to have strengths within language arts and areas where they need to grow, meaning they could be green in vocabulary, but red in comprehension of informational text. They shouldn't always be stuck in the red tier 3 intervention group because they have some green pieces, right? And to talk even further, everybody needs tier 1 instruction, whether you have red areas or no red areas. And a lot of teachers we know this from the work of TNTP with the opportunity myth and newer research that they're coming out with. We are not putting grade level instruction in front of all kids. And I think that's a problem with the triangle, is people are thinking, oh, they're yellow in language arts. And so they're never giving them that green tier 1 instruction. That's scary.
Yeah.
So not a different system, but a more granular system, a more fluid system.
And I would imagine the less fluid system that, we all learned about, 25 years ago, it doesn't really fully absorb kind of the cultural context and the humanity, the individualism of each student. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've best experienced this with principals, and when I do a lot of coaching, and as I'm talking to principals and asking them about their needs, what do your teachers need? What's your school like? They give me things like percents, like well, 37% of our students da 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 da, because that's the data they're getting fed with. And I'm like, okay, what is, like, how many kids is that? First
Yeah.
of all, how many kids? Or who is that? Like, what kinds of kids? Is that, do you have a population of a lot of foster youth and you need to really be working on something else for them? There's so much data that makes a student up, right? And it's not an overall score of something. It's what kind of families they live with, and what kind of experiences they've had in life, and I mean that both positive and negative experiences, and how they're showing up, how much sleep they get, how much food they get. All of those pieces are data points as well. And when we're looking at proficiency as the only data point of a student, that makes me real nervous. It makes me real nervous, and it makes me sad for teachers that we're pushing proficiency so much that we've forgotten about the humans that make the data.
So when I have seen you write in the past, and let me make sure I get this
Mhm.
quote here, quote, that we need to be humanizing student data through the lens of culture, communication, and commitment. I love alliteration, and this is a great
Me
one in
too.
education. Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
Yes, I really think that administrators have the ability to humanize the data culture by talking about numbers of kids and never percents. They need to talk to their staff meeting and say, guys, here's what we know. We have 412 students who need outrageous love from us. That is so much better than saying 37% of our students are not proficient, right? Like, well,
Yeah.
that just feels better. Teachers have or even like images of individual kids will make a big difference. I think that kind of data culture of the humans that you are working for, and have 180 days or however long your school year is, that you're on this mission together for those kids. That's how you create that culture. And then bringing in the communication piece means from leaders to teachers, kind of like I said, but also from teachers to kids. Like, they need to know you're on their team. I want my son to be in a class where a teacher says, you are going to grow this year. You're going to grow so much. We're going to keep track of how much you grow. And some of the things you're going to grow in are going to be how you talk to your friends. And some of the things you grow in are what you can do with numbers. And some of the things you grow in are math. But we're going to keep talking about them. And that's so much better than proficiency. And then the last one, commitment, is from all stakeholders to say, we're going to do this. We're going to get better. And it doesn't matter what obstacles in our way. We're going to find ways to remove them because they're humans. They're worth it. And it's just exciting to think about it that way. It's rejuvenating to think about it that way instead of getting a certain percent of your kids into the green.
It is quite a paradigm shift for educators and administrators to heed your guidance here and look beyond proficiency. Everything that administrators do these days seems like it's geared towards the proficiency. And one, because they're facing pressure because test scores
Sure.
and things like that. But also proficiency, while not the only thing we should be relying on, is at least it's quantifiable. It's
Right.
measurable. There's,
I agree. And
and
there's a benchmark there.
treasure what we measure and benchmarks
Mm.
and all of that. So, with that very strong allure that teachers and administrators have to gravitate towards the things that are not only measurable, but things that are you're directly incentivized to influence because of, state grades and things like that. How do you get yourself back to the whole child, the humanizing, the culture, communication, commitment? Is there a way to achieve one without sacrificing the other, or perhaps even in service of proficiency?
Oh, I love that. In service of proficiency is it. And it's one thing that we've never been very good at because we haven't taken enough time for it, and it's goals. It's setting goals with their students, learning goals, not performance goals that are a number, but learning goals that will get you incremental steps to proficiency. Every student that's below level knows it. Every single one of them. They know they're in the low group. They know they're in the low tier, because they're getting this extra help at the kidney table. But what they don't know is what the heck they're supposed to do to get out of that group. They're just in it. We keep teaching, 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 and we don't really communicate with them about what they need to do to make steps out. And most of the time, it's because teachers don't have the data that they need at that granular level to be able to tell them. They don't have the information to say, "Hey, you are so great at vocabulary. What's holding us up is when we ask you about informational text." So what we're going to do in our small group every time I'm with you is work on informational text. And when you get better at that, then you're going to be closer to grade level. You're going to be closer to proficiency. You're going to grow so much in that you're going to get there. We can talk about proficiency. It just has to be in a goal.
Well, perhaps what I'm hearing then is, the issue isn't just with the data, but we need data at the individual student micro level as opposed to macro level data. Something that just says 43% of our students are proficient doesn't really serve the individual students. Whereas if I can get granular level data on a specific student, know the places where they are strong, where the places where they need additional intervention, now the data is actually serving me. It's allowing me to provide effective instruction for that individual student.
Absolutely. Actionable, right?
Actionable,
and the best actions that you can take are also connected to appropriate resources. So it's great when you know that, and then even better when you can say, okay, here's what I can use to help them.
Right on. And viewers and listeners, we are going to put the link to Brooklyn's white paper on this subject in the episode description. I highly encourage you to check it out and really, really just internalize and get the most out of it, because this is the fall. It's the beginning of the fall right now. This is the time to really get into it. And if you're going to try something new, you might as well try it new right at the beginning. Are there any other insights in that white paper, Brooklyn, that you feel like we haven't given a lot of discussion to that are really worth talking about?
Yeah, just maybe, we've kind of stayed big picture even with a few details, but I think the idea of small groups. I talk about the stigma of small groups in that paper, and I alluded to it a little bit about kids knowing which group they're in or not. But when the commitment to a positive data culture with good communication and good commitment is in your classroom, kids will have a better experience and a more effective time in these small groups, instead of it just being like, okay, the kids over here are just working on something while I take care of these other students. Because the kids that are over there working on something will know what they're working on and why they're working on it. And so the idea of effective small groups really explodes. And the overall tone that I use to try to describe that is that it's kind of catchy, and I like alliteration, so here we go, is that children are not colors, right? They're not colors on your RTI triangle. And these learners are not levels. And these tiers are not should be teaching opportunities. And when we take those kind of reminders, I think it will really set people off on a good course this fall.
I think so too. And I tend to have a little trouble with the notion in RTI that small group instruction is exclusively a remediation technique, that it's only the thing we use after large group instruction has not been effective for that student. When I've had lots of education professionals on this program who have spoke to the virtues of small group instruction across the board, that it isn't just something we use in the RTI framework, but should be utilized in lots of educational contexts because it's generally an effective way to impart information to students. Same thing with individualized instruction. There are lots of situations where you don't just want to use it as a last resort when the first two tiers in the RTI have failed, but that there are education settings when individualized instruction can be highly effective. So we shouldn't necessarily default to the sage on the stage large lecture model as the first option in every educational context.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. The engagement factor of students, it needs to be on everyone's radar this fall, just to bring kids back in and get them connected to their peers and connected to you. And I think those connections happen, a lot better when we take multiple opportunities in small groups to make those connections.
Fantastic. And with all the students finally coming back to school again, I know they're eager to get together in groups and feel like they can interact with their friends again. Completely understand. Folks, you can find out more about our guest work again by visiting curriculumassociates.com and at Curriculum Associates on Twitter. And we're going to put Brooklyn's white paper in that episode description. Brooklyn, this has been a treat. Before we let you go, though, one last question. We love asking this one of all of our guests. If with the snap of your fingers, you could make any change to the education system, what change would it be?
With one snap, I would like to give teachers the continued experience to learn more from each other. We put ourselves in these classrooms and we shut doors and we take care of our kids for, a school year, and we hope that we're doing a good job, and we don't get to see from our colleagues. And I just wish that there was some magical way, without taking time off or going to a conference, that we could just go inside each other's rooms more and learn from each other and spread that goodness. That would be amazing, and we'd be a better nation for it.
Brooklyn, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for your time this week.
Thank you.
And thank you all for checking out Charter School Superstars.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.